"Hi, I'm Florence. My parents banned me from our family dinner, said the will left me nothing. They laughed as if erasing me would make them whole again. But that night, sitting outside the house I grew up in, I realized this wasn't just about money, it was about being erased from my own bloodline. And when the lawyer finally spoke, everything they built on lies began to crumble." The message came through while I was wiping down the kitchen counter, just after dusk. A group text from my mother, polite, almost sterile: "Dinner at the house, Saturday at 6. Everyone expected. No warmth, no smiley face, no love, Mom. Just that." I stared at it for a long moment. The house. That house. I hadn't stepped foot inside in 5 years. Not since Christmas Eve, when I'd shown up with gifts and was told, through the door, that the plans had changed. No one opened it. Still, a part of me thought, maybe this time was different. Maybe they were trying. I reread the message. My name wasn't mentioned. Everyone expected. But my brothers, Mike and Darren, they got tagged directly. "See you there, Mike. Don't be late, Darren." Me? I was just part of everyone. I stood at the bottom of those old porch steps on Saturday evening, dessert in hand, an apple crumble I used to make when I was a teenager, back when they still pretended to like it. The lights were on inside, voices floated out, laughter that didn't feel like it missed me. I knocked once, then walked in like I still had permission. The house looked the same floral wallpaper, the same clunky coat rack that always tilted to the left. But the warmth was gone. It was a museum now. A cold one. I caught a glimpse of my mother in the hallway mirror as she passed. She didn't even pause. My brothers were already there, leaning against the kitchen counter like they owned it. No one said my name. "Hi," I offered, holding the dessert like a peace treaty. "Oh. You came," Darren muttered, half turning. Mike just took a sip of his drink. Dinner was set in the dining room. White tablecloth. Place cards. Wine glasses lined up like they were waiting for a toast that wouldn't come. I looked for my name. Nothing. "Must have been an oversight," Mom said when I asked, not making eye contact. So I stood there holding that damn crumble, while they all eased into their assigned seats like they'd rehearsed it. I found a folding chair in the corner and dragged it over. It screeched against the hardwood. We ate in near silence, the kind where forks clink too loud and no one really tastes anything. They passed dishes around me, never to me. I poured my own water. Then Dad stood. He tapped his wine glass with a fork, sharp and precise. The sound cut through everything. "I wanted you all here to let you know the will's been finalized," he said, his voice colder than I remembered. He didn't sit. He didn't smile. "It's done. Assets have been distributed as discussed. There will be no further changes." He didn't say my name. Just like the text. Darren looked down at his plate. Mike adjusted his cufflink. Mom reached for her wine and drank like it was water. I sat there, not really sitting, more like balancing on the edge of that folding chair. My hands under the table clenched so tight my fingernails left marks on my palms. I thought about the years I ran errands for them, covered shifts when Dad was sick, missed dates, missed sleep, missed living. And now, distributed as discussed. Not to me. I wanted to say something. I think I opened my mouth. But what would I say? What about me? Like a child? Like someone who didn't already know the answer? This wasn't an accident. It was a decision. I looked at Mom. She blinked twice, then looked away. Inside, I was screaming. On the outside, I was calm. Too calm. I could hear my own breath. Feel it in my throat. I stood up slowly. Left the pie on the table. No one stopped me. No one asked why I was leaving. I walked out the front door, past the coat rack, past the porch where I used to sit with my knees scraped and a popsicle in my hand. Down the steps. Onto the street. The air was crisp. It filled my lungs in a way that felt like permission. I didn't cry. I walked. 1 block. Then 2. Then my phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. "Florence, call me. It's urgent. Regarding your father's will." I froze. The name below the message, Paul, estate lawyer. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Was this a scam? A mistake? I typed, "What's going on?" He replied almost instantly, "Meet me tomorrow. There's something you need to know. It's yours." Mine? What the hell does that mean? I looked up, streetlights buzzing above me, the distant hum of someone's TV through an open window. Whatever this was. The story wasn't over. Not even close. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling, hearing the silence like it was speaking directly to me. The kind of quiet that used to feel like safety now felt like power. I thought about the dinner, about walking out without saying a word. That calmness I felt, that wasn't weakness. It was something else. Something new. The message kept replaying in my head. It's yours. What the hell did that mean? A mistake? Some legal misfire? Or was there more to this than I realized? I kept remembering Paul. Uncle Henry's old friend. He was always around during holidays, the kind of guy who'd bring a bottle of scotch and leave with half the adults in the room laughing. But I hadn't seen him since Henry died. Hadn't even known he was a lawyer. Still, something in my gut told me this wasn't a prank. I wasn't important enough to be targeted by a prank this elaborate. No one in my family cared enough. By morning, the sky had turned a soft gray. It was the kind of drizzle that made everything look like it belonged in black and white. I took a slow bus ride into Cincinnati, past places I hadn't seen in years. People going to work, kids in backpacks, baristas wiping down sidewalk chalkboards. Paul's office was tucked above an old pharmacy, the kind with dusty window displays and a creaky wooden door. I walked in, the smell of rain mixing with the musty scent of old paper and varnished floors. It was oddly comforting, like stepping into a memory you'd forgotten you missed. The receptionist looked up when I gave my name. Her brows lifted like she hadn't expected me to actually show. She buzzed me in without a word. Paul stood up when I walked into his office. He looked older than I remembered, grayer, a little rounder around the middle. But his eyes were the same, sharp, serious, but not unkind. "Florence," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Thanks for coming." His office was full of books. Legal binders, old hardcover volumes, case files stacked neatly. There was a photograph on his shelf, him and Uncle Henry on a fishing boat, both smiling like they'd just cheated death. I sat down, still clutching my purse like it was a life raft. Paul didn't waste time. "I was your Uncle Henry's personal attorney," he said, folding his hands together on the desk. "Private. He didn't use the firm your father's connected to." That caught me off guard. "He rewrote his will 2 years before he passed," Paul continued. "And he left everything to you." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Everything," he said. "His estate. The cabin in Vermont. His investment accounts. Stocks. Bonds. 600,000 in cash and liquid assets. All of it. To you." My mouth was dry. I hadn't even been invited to the funeral. I barely got a phone call when he passed. Paul slid a folder across the desk toward me. "This is your copy. It's been processed. It's real." He made sure it was sealed until you turned 36. "Which was last month, right?" I nodded slowly. "Why me?" Paul sighed, leaned back slightly. He knew how things were. He saw how they treated you. He didn't agree with it. But he knew they'd try to cut you out of anything he left unless he made it airtight. So he did. I stared at the folder. My fingers touched the edge but I didn't open it. I couldn't. Not yet. 1,000 memories rushed through, Uncle Henry handing me his keys when I wanted to drive for the first time. Letting me skip chores to read by the lake. Listening when no one else would. "He was the only one who ever saw me," I whispered. Paul nodded. "He said you made him proud." The room was quiet. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I felt something else instead, like something had clicked into place. A quiet strength. Not joy. Not even relief. Just readiness. I looked at Paul. "So, what now?" He opened another folder. "There's one more thing." Of course there was. He included a clause, Paul said, his voice steady. "If you choose to accept the inheritance, you must claim it in person. Publicly. To your family. Within 14 days." My heart dropped. "What?" Paul nodded. "He didn't want you to hide from them anymore. He said silence was how they kept control. This is how you take it back." "And if I don't?" He hesitated just a beat. "Then the estate is transferred to a foundation. Everything. Gone." I looked down at the folder again. My uncle had put everything on the line to make sure I didn't just inherit, but stood up. Paul leaned forward. He believed in you. I took a breath. Then I better make it count. I drove back through the drizzle, the legal folder clutched tight like a shield against the storm outside, and maybe the one coming inside too. The sky hung low, smeared with gray, and the headlights of oncoming cars blurred behind raindrops. I barely noticed. My mind was locked on what Paul had said. The weight of what my uncle had done and what it meant I'd have to do. The silence in the car was thick, but not empty. This time it was laced with something new, resolve. I kept hearing the words in my head, you have to confront them. In person. That wasn't just the legal clause. That was a challenge. A dare. A final test from the only man who ever stood in my corner. I pulled into my driveway, sat for a second in the idling engine, staring at my front door. It looked the same, but I wasn't. I wasn't coming home as a daughter anymore. I was stepping back into that house as someone they couldn't erase. Not anymore. As I opened the door, I heard the low hum of voices. Darren was pacing in the living room. He stopped mid-stride when he saw me, eyes narrowing like I'd walked in with blood on my hands. Amber appeared from the hallway, arms crossed, her expression a mask of forced concern. "Glad you made it back," she said, voice syrupy sweet. "We were wondering if you were planning to sleep at that lawyer's office." I didn't bother responding. I didn't need to. I just stepped past them, heading toward the stairs. "So," Darren called after me, "are you going to fill us in? You know, about the urgent estate matter?" I paused, hand on the banister. "What are you talking about?" Amber scoffed. "Don't play dumb, Florence. You storm out of dinner, get a cryptic text from some Paul guy, and now you're back like you've got something to prove." I turned slowly to face them, keeping my tone even. If I had something to prove, I wouldn't be standing here. I'd be at a courthouse. Darren chuckled without humor. "We all need to sit down and talk." I met his eyes. "I don't negotiate from the floor." I left them there and walked straight into my old study. The door creaked open, hadn't been touched in years. The air inside was stale, the scent of paper and dust clinging to everything. I flicked on the lamp. The desk, the old wooden filing cabinet, still stood as I left them. I pulled open the bottom drawer. Most of it was junk, old receipts, expired insurance cards. Then, nestled behind a stack of folders, I found it, a thick file labeled Uncle's Trust. I opened it carefully. Inside were copies of will drafts, handwritten notes, legal correspondences, dated years back. One sticky note in particular caught my breath. "Marissa Caldwell must inherit by 2023. Marissa Caldwell. That was my birth name. No one called me that anymore." I kept reading. Another note, clause active only if confrontation occurs within 14 days post 36th birthday. There it was. In black and white. My uncle had built the plan years ago. My family had known. Maybe not all the details, but enough to try and bury it. Hands trembling, I snapped photos of every page, every sticky note. I wasn't just protecting myself, I was gathering evidence. As I leaned back in the creaky chair, the room spun slightly. Not from dizziness. From rage. How long had they been planning this? How many quiet conversations, whispered plans? Had I really been that naive? I whispered to the room, not expecting a response, "You never let me fight before." And then I remembered Uncle Henry's voice, gentle but steady. "You don't have to yell to take up space, sweetheart. But when the time comes, don't flinch." I messaged Gideon. Just 4 words, I found the documents. Then I stood in the hallway again. Amber and Darren were still murmuring near the kitchen. I walked up to them, phone in hand, and held out the screen. "Recognize this?" I asked. Amber leaned in, then jerked back like she'd seen a ghost. "Where did you get that?" I didn't blink. "It's real. You knew." Darren moved quickly. "Florence, let's not." He lunged toward the phone, but I stepped back, clutching it to my chest. "Try it," I said. "Try taking one more thing from me." He froze. Amber's face twisted, but she said nothing. "We already transferred the Vermont house," Darren said suddenly. "To your name. You missed your chance to claim it. It's gone." My breath caught. "You what?" Amber tilted her head. "Guess you were too slow, honey." I stepped back, rage boiling. "You can't steal what was never yours." They said nothing. And that silence. It confirmed everything. I stared them down, the weight of the folder still in my bag, my fingers tight around my phone. "You think I came back to ask permission?" I said, voice low. "I didn't. I came to claim what's mine." I shut the study door behind me and leaned against it. My chest still tight from the encounter in the living room. Darren's words echoed, how they'd already transferred the Vermont property. My fingers curled into fists before I forced them to relax. I walked to the desk and laid the folder down gently, like it might shatter. It didn't look powerful, but everything inside had shifted the ground beneath me. I pulled out the chair and sat. The silence was deep. No calls. No footsteps. Just the faint tick of the old wall clock. My eyes landed on the photo of Uncle Henry and me, taken the summer I turned 12. He had his arm around my shoulder. I looked up at him like he was the only person in the world who saw me. I whispered, "I'm not powerless." The rain had stopped. But inside, the storm had just begun. I opened the folder again. This time I went slower, steadier. In the back, tucked between folded correspondence, I found a thin ledger, typed, annotated in ink. Property earnings, quarterly statements. And there it was, the Vermont property. Rental income. Redirected. Multiple entries marked with Amber A. Caldwell Trust, retroactive adjustment, 10%. I sat back, eyes wide. It wasn't just the house. It was money. Income. Something ongoing and systematic. There were crossed out lines, missing amounts, payments unrecorded. Like someone was intentionally erasing footprints. And then I saw the note. Taped crooked on a faded yellow slip, confirm 10% for Amber by Q2. Legal ground equals family quota. My heart beat faster. I flipped through the rest, marked everything, flagged pages, snapped photos with my phone. Each page a piece of proof. Each one another layer of the lie they built on my back. They weren't just trying to keep me out of the will. They were rewriting the narrative. Pretending I was never part of it. I stood, folder in hand, and walked out. Amber was alone in the living room, scrolling her phone like nothing had happened. I stepped in, set the file on the coffee table, opened to one document, and slid it toward her. She looked down, then up at me. "What's this?" "You tell me," I said calmly. "This is the foundation you've been using for your little charity dinners. The one you renamed." Her eyes narrowed. "That's my fund. I've been running it for years." I leaned in. "No, Amber. It was established in 2018. By me. Under my birth name. Marissa Caldwell." The flash of panic in her eyes was quick, but real. Then came the smirk. "I improved it. I gave it structure. You just had an idea." "Your improvements don't erase authorship," I said. "You took credit. You rewrote history." She stood. "History remembers winners, Florence." I nodded. "That's why I'm writing mine down now." That's when Eileen staggered into the room. Her hand clutched at her chest. I can't breathe." She dropped to the couch, gasping. Darren bolted in. Amber's voice shot up in pitch. "Call someone. She's having an episode." I stood frozen for half a second, long enough to feel the old instinct tug at me. Run to her. Help. Fix. But I didn't move. Instead, I stepped to the side, pulled out my phone, and called 911. Voice calm. Address precise. "My mother is experiencing chest pain. Send paramedics." Then I ended the call and looked back at them. "They're on their way." Darren hovered beside Eileen, panicking. Amber fussed with a blanket. My mother looked up at me, weak but watching. I said clearly, not loud but enough to cut through the room, "If illness can be used as a weapon, so can truth. I will not yield to either." Amber's head snapped toward me. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer her. Outside, I noticed lights flicking on in the houses across the street. Shadows moving behind curtains. This drama had spilled out past our walls. I turned away, heading toward the door. "Florence!" Darren barked. "You're just going to leave her like this?" I paused, hand on the knob. I did what needed to be done. I called for help. Then I looked over my shoulder, gaze steady. "And if you ever accuse me again of doing less than that, make sure your hands are clean first." I stepped outside just as the ambulance pulled up, the red lights casting long flickers across the yard. I didn't look back. I didn't join them for dinner. I stayed upstairs, the door to my study cracked just enough to let in the sounds of silverware tapping ceramic and murmurs filtered through ceiling vents. Low voices. Words like claim, transfer, damages. They didn't even try to hide it anymore. I sat by the window. The rain was gentler now, brushing against the glass like a nervous whisper. I clutched the mug of tea I hadn't touched. My stomach was too tight. I wasn't hungry, I was wired. Amber's voice floated up the stairs. Light. Smoothed over. Then a knock. She peeked through the doorway with a plate in hand. You want something to eat? I brought extra. I turned to her and said, no, thank you. She shrugged and walked off, heels clacking like punctuation. Once I was alone again, I opened my phone, mostly out of habit, and froze. Amber had posted something. On the Foundation's official page. A long, carefully worded statement. My name right there in the opening line. Not just mentioned, framed. She has chosen a path of selfishness, rejecting the family that raised her and the causes we fight for. Some people value money over integrity. Some of us don't. My face went hot. My breath quickened. The comments were already flooding in. Wow, can't believe she would turn on her own family. Entitled much? She didn't even show up for dinner. What does that tell you? I sat there, paralyzed. Then snapped into action. Screenshot. Scroll. Screenshot. Every comment. Every like. Every timestamp. I sent them all to Gideon with a message, we may need to go wide. I wanted to scream. But I didn't. Instead, I opened the Foundation page again, and saw it. A photo. Amber had attached a scanned image, clear as day. A document titled, Renounce Claim of Inheritance. Signed. Dated. 2 years ago. My name scribbled at the bottom. I dropped the phone. That paper never existed. I never signed any such thing. I never even heard of it. But there it was. She posted it publicly. Declaring I'd walked away willingly. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. Commented directly on her post, this is a forgery. I have never signed this. Proof is not what you say, it's what you can stand behind in court. She replied within minutes. Careful, Marissa. Truth has receipts. Yours just got lost in your bitterness. I stared at that line until the words blurred. My hands balled into fists. I wouldn't let this slide. I marched down to the old family archive cabinet in the hallway closet, where Mom kept every document from decades past. I hadn't touched it in years. I unlocked the bottom drawer and dug mortgage stubs, gift receipts, bank transfers, all in my name. Tied to the Vermont house. Tied to contributions I'd made quietly. All there. Proof that I belonged. I laid them out, taking photos as I went. But when I brought them to Amber and Darren, their expressions didn't shift. Darren just said, that was Mom and Dad's money. They paid in your name, but it wasn't yours. Amber added, cool as ever, you can twist paper all you want. But the story's already out there. That cold settled in my chest again, not sadness. No. Something worse. I said quietly, if you erase my past, you erase your own humanity. Then I went back to the study. Locked the door behind me. Sat at the desk and opened a new file. My public statement. I am not defined by your lies. Simple. Steady. Then I recorded the voiceover, my voice flat, unshaken. Layered screenshots over the video. Included dates, paper trails. Even that old photo of Uncle and me. Because some things need faces. I messaged Gideon, I'm posting it tonight. He replied with one word, ready. It was late. Quiet. The kind of dark where you could hear your own pulse. I sat still for 1 full minute. Then I hit post and watched the red notification count climb like fire in dry grass. I woke before dawn. The clouds outside pressed low, like they were closing in on me. The folder sat untouched on my nightstand, heavy with expectations and reminders. I rested my hand on it, feeling the weight of what it held, and what lay ahead. Amber's public post. The forged document. The family's denial. It all swirled in my mind with electric tension. But this morning, I decided, activation starts. I texted Gideon, let's move forward. No frills. No doubts. Just resolve. I walked to the mirror. My reflection, older lines, sharper eyes. The softness I used to carry was gone. I squared my shoulders. Today is not a test. Today is action. By mid-morning I was driving downtown to Gideon's small office. City traffic hummed around me, but I felt separated, focused. I carried the trust folder like armor. Gideon greeted me at the door. He didn't smile. He leaned back behind his desk, steepled fingers. "I've reviewed everything you sent," he said. He laid out our options: an injunction to block Amber's statements, a public disclosure of all documents, cease and desist letters. He warned that Amber's media influence would push back. I told him I was prepared to bring it all to a courtroom if I had to. That I wouldn't settle for half measures. He nodded but said softly, "Be careful. When you expose them, they'll lash back harder than you expect." We agreed to leak parts of the trust documents to a trusted journalist, enough to force eyes on the story, without giving away everything. Then Gideon leaned forward with a hard breath. "I found something you need to see." On a separate sheet was a document purported to show your signature renouncing claim. The handwriting was wrong. The date stamp manipulated. Every detail screamed forgery. I stared at the printout in disbelief. My heart pounded. The idea that they tried to erase me entirely now had proof. I controlled my voice. "They're going to regret doing this." Gideon nodded. "This isn't just about inheritance anymore. It's about integrity, reputation, and justice." I swallowed. I nodded. This was bigger than me. Then Gideon paused, looked away a moment, and brought out a sealed envelope. He placed it gently before me. Inside, a letter in Uncle Henry's handwriting. Held in escrow. Addressed to me. It named himself and Gideon as guardians of the estate and included a clause: "If any child undermines you, everything reverts to you." Amber never knew. I felt vindication. This legal edge, this moral truth, shielded me. I looked at Gideon. "Use it when the time is right." Later, I returned home. The light was fading. I carried the forged documents and the letter. I set them on my desk, lined them out. I composed an email to Mom, Amber, Darren demanding they publicly acknowledge the documents or face legal exposure. I rehearsed the words. I paced. I steadied my heart. Then my phone buzzed. "Amber, we need to talk tonight." My lips curved quietly. I replied, "Yes, under subpoena." I muted notifications. I disconnected unnecessary lines of contact. I prepared for the storm they invited. The sky darkened outside. I turned off the lamp. The storm I felt wasn't outside anymore. By early afternoon, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. I had to silence it just to breathe. But curiosity, or survival, made me tap into the storm. Amber's post had exploded. The latest version wasn't just smug, it was vicious. Accusations stacked like bricks, twisted truths, skewed intentions, and snippets of old video stitched to paint me as some washed-up, bitter woman out for pity and profit. One clip had me in mid-sentence, cut to make me sound self-centered. Another distorted a foundation event into a personal gain scheme. Comments rolled in faster than I could screenshot. Playing the victim for views. "She's just mad her cash cow dried up." Typical. Crying when the money stops. I felt it. That old ache of being misunderstood, intentionally misread. My name dragged through mud I never stepped in. But under the noise, a handful of clear voices cut through, people I didn't know defending me, reminding others to wait for facts. That flicker of support kept me grounded. I whispered to myself, "You don't get to write my story." I blocked the worst trolls. The truly ugly ones. Not to silence them, but to protect my peace. Then Amber dropped the next hit. A new post, polished and pinned, claiming she had rescued our family's financial records from my negligence, said she took over only after I mismanaged donations and withheld reports. She shared screenshots of emails, allegedly from me, apologizing for late filings, begging her to cover for me one last time. I didn't write them. Darren stood in the living room reading one out loud. Not just to himself, loud enough for others to hear. His voice calm, but his eyes didn't meet mine. I stood just inside the hallway. Every word sliced across me. "She asked Amber to falsify reports," Darren said, as if narrating a novel. I said nothing at first. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. This was deeper than a smear. This was psychological warfare. Gaslighting on public display. I turned back into the hallway, walked straight to my desk, and called Gideon. "They've crossed the line," I told him. He didn't ask for proof. He knew I wasn't one to panic without reason. "Then we respond," he said. "We use the signature analysis. We use the letter." Silence hung for a moment. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," I said, "but we do it anyway." I took down my last post, cleared the feed, then uploaded a new one. It was simple: let the truth speak. And let the proof lead. I attached nothing yet, but it set the tone. Just before sunset, I went to check the front blinds. I had this strange feeling. Outside, near the edge of the hedges, a shadow shifted. A man in a baseball cap, holding his phone, angled toward my house. They were watching. Back inside, I moved through the living room. Something felt off. I paused near the mantel. The family portrait. It used to be 6 of us: my parents, uncle, me, Darren, and Amber. Taken years ago. We kept it framed, hung in that same spot for decades. Now it showed 5. I walked closer. I wasn't there. My entire image had been digitally removed. The frame unchanged. The others untouched. Just me, gone. I stared at it like it might snap back into truth. But it didn't. I didn't cry. I walked to Amber's door. She was texting, lounging like nothing had happened. "You removed me from our family photo?" I asked. She didn't answer. Didn't even flinch. "You erased me?" I repeated, firmer. She looked up, calm as if I asked about dinner. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the altered portrait. "That's fine," I said. "You just gave me the final piece." Back in my room, I stared at that new image beside the original one from my childhood. I remembered how it felt, even then, to be made to feel extra. Like I had to earn my place in every room, every photo, every story. But this wasn't rejection. It was erasure. And I wouldn't let it stand. I set up my next post: side-by-side portraits, old and altered. Below them, the forged signature report. And finally, the sealed letter from Uncle, dated and signed. I timed the post to go live during their usual dinner hour. When their phones would be within reach. When the silence around the table would crack. I looked at the final preview. Then I said it aloud, not to anyone, but to the part of me they tried to delete. "I'm here. And I won't disappear." I hit post. And as the upload bar climbed, I could feel it, the kingdom trembling. At exactly 6:30 that evening, I pressed post. My hands didn't shake this time. The caption was simple: "You erased me, but truth will reprint my place." Beneath it, the forged signature, the altered portrait, the proof that everything they'd said was built on manipulation and deceit. Within seconds, the numbers started climbing: likes, shares, reactions pouring in from people I hadn't heard from in years. A few comments cut deep, but most were pure shock. Unbelievable. I always wondered. Finally, the truth. Screenshots began spreading faster than I could follow. My story was no longer just mine, it belonged to every person who had been silenced by family politics and power. I took one last look at the post, set my phone down, and walked toward the dining room. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked different, firmer somehow. Inside, the table was already set, candles flickering, the air too quiet. Everyone was there: Amber, Darren, Josie, a few of the others. They tried to act casual, passing dishes and pouring drinks, but the tension hung like smoke. I sat down without waiting for an invitation. Amber forced a smile. "You look calm, considering the mess you just made online." "Calm," I said, setting my napkin across my lap, "comes from truth. You should try it sometime." Before she could respond, I tapped the play button on my phone. A man's voice filled the room, slow, deliberate, worn with age. "If you're hearing this, it means Marissa's suspicions were correct." The family lawyer. The same one who'd handled my father's affairs for decades. Amber froze. Darren's fork-covered midair. "I kept a copy of the second will," the lawyer continued. "In it, Florence was named executor of the estate. It was intended to take effect upon revision, but was deliberately withheld." The sound of the man's breathing filled the silence. "If this is now public, I can confirm, there was interference. I anticipated tampering. That's why this recording exists." When the audio stopped, no one spoke. I looked around the table. The candlelight flickered across stunned faces. Amber finally found her voice. "He was sick. Probably confused." "You can't," Josie interrupted softly. "I remember Uncle Frank mentioning that second will. He told me he wanted to fix things, that he regretted some decisions." Amber turned toward her, snapping, "You're mistaken." But then Uncle Rob nodded. "No. He told me the same thing before the hospital. Said he wanted to make sure everything was fair this time." The silence shifted. People who had once avoided eye contact were now glancing between one another, doubt spreading like ripples on water. Amber's voice cracked slightly. They're confused. They don't know what they're saying. I met her gaze and said evenly, or maybe truth doesn't fade as easily as you hoped. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope, yellowed edges, old handwriting that none of them could mistake. My father's. I found this in the attic, I said. He never mailed it. I slid it across the table. Amber didn't touch it. I opened it myself and began to read. My dear Florence, I know I failed to protect what mattered. I've allowed division to fester. If anything happens to me, I want it known, my intent was always for you to lead. You understand the balance between justice and compassion. That is the heart of this family. Don't let them rewrite what's right. The words trembled slightly in my hand, but my voice didn't waver. Amber leaned back, shaking her head. This doesn't prove anything. Anyone could have written that. I set the letter down beside her glass. Except it stated, signed, and matches every other letter he wrote me. You can have it verified tomorrow. The table stayed quiet. Even Darren couldn't meet my eyes. The only sound was the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the shallow rhythm of their breathing. Then, one by one, people began to rise. Josie first, then Rob. No one said much, just quiet nods, murmurs of apology, shame in their eyes. The same people who had looked at me with suspicion days ago now looked at Amber with disgust. Amber sat rigid, color drained from her face. Darren muttered something under his breath and pushed his plate away. I stood last. Reached for my glass of water, held it up slightly. To justice, I said. Quiet, patient, and inevitable. No one replied. I didn't need them to. As I walked toward the doorway, the soft clinking of cutlery behind me faded into silence. I didn't look back. Not because I couldn't, but because for the first time in years, I finally didn't need to. The silence after that dinner stretched longer than any battle I'd fought. I sat in my living room, the echoes of voices and glass clinks still ringing in my ears. I stared at the empty dining table, the candles gone, but the memory heavy. My phone lit continuously, emails, messages of support from people who had seen the post, strangers who said they felt less alone because of my story. Amber and Darren kept their distance. No statements. No confrontation. The quiet from their side felt like a retreat. I didn't let myself revel in victory. Instead, I gathered old letters, photographs, those relics of a life I tried to suppress. I looked at the girl I once was, beneath wounds and omissions. I whispered, winning the fight is only the beginning of winning back yourself. Days later I met my lawyer in his office, neat, undistracting, always calm. He handed me a legal document I'd never seen. A clause from an earlier version of my father's will, long forgotten, never revoked, set up a trust fund in my name. Untouched. Growing quietly for years. My throat tightened. The room felt smaller. He planned for you, Florence, even when you doubted it, he said. Tears blurred the text, but I read it again. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was validation from the silence he kept. At that moment, I felt seen. Later that day I drove to the cemetery. The sky was pale, the ground damp. I carried fresh lilies and the unopened letter my father never mailed. I stood before his stone, hands pressed around the blooms. I forgive you, but I won't forget, I said. Memories flooded, bedtime stories, arguments in the hallways, silent dinners. I placed the letter at his tomb. It lifted gently on a breeze and fell. You taught me how to fight by not standing beside me, I whispered. I left him there and walked back to my car. The air was cool. Back home, I reclaimed the spare room. It became something new, a place of memory and learning. On one wall I framed his letter. On another, quotes that kept me upright. A small shelf held the original family portrait, unedited. I wasn't erased anymore. That evening I began writing a blog for women over 50 who had been betrayed, cast aside, or silenced. My first post, we may have been erased, but we were never gone. Comments poured in, I thought I was alone. Your journey gives me hope. I didn't wait for validation. I spoke to empower. Then the mail arrived. A notice, Darren was challenging the trust. I sat calmly at my desk, opening the envelope like opening any door. The next morning I met with my legal team. They waited as I walked in, steady, composed. If they want a war, I said, They'll meet a woman who's no longer afraid. They nodded. That night, I stood by my window, watching dawn break. The sky shifted from navy to pale gold. My reflection looked back, older, sure, resilient. This time, I whispered, I won't just survive. I'll lead. As sunlight touched my face, I realized it was never just about a will. It was about becoming someone who matters, on her own terms.